Hey guys, how's it going? Paul Harris here. Welcome back to another one of my videos. If you follow my channel closely, you'll know that last Sunday I posted a video called Don't Make the Same Mistakes as I Did at PwC. Now, a lot of traction from that video in comparison to my usual videos on this channel. And I had a lot of comments and questions leading on from my experience at PwC, other accountancy and finance related questions, qualification related questions. So I thought I'd make in this video a sort of Q&A style video. I'll read through the comments, I'll respond as best as I can to the questions you've asked, and hopefully it's useful. You know, on this channel, the main goal of this channel is to try and give you guys watching more information, whether that's regarding investing or career advice or anything really. So I'm just here to support you guys really and try and give you what you want. So if you ask questions, I know that's directly something that you're interested in. So what better way of getting straight to the point and delivering information that is relevant to you. So, with that being said, let's get into it. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is basically go through each of the questions from the comment section. I'm going to answer it as best as I can and try and give you some guidance regarding what the question is and try and work out why you're asking it in the first place. So, first question, could you do a video rating qualifications that complement chartered accountants? So, I assume what this is meaning is what other qualifications can you get that make you look even more appealing to a certain employer? And really that depends on the type of job and industry you're thinking of working in. Now, if you're a chartered accountant and you go into working in a finance department or you're working in, a controllership department in a company, then you'll be able to work up the corporate ladder with just the chartered accountancy qualification. Even if it's ACCA or ACCA, the qualification should get you as far as, even if you want to become like a CFO, that qualification is enough to become, top of the ladder really within that specific job role. Now, the point here is you can get too focused on just acquiring the qualifications. And really, the best thing in my mind for an employer, or if you work in a company, is the experience you have in that industry, the knowledge you gain year on year of actually knowing the business that you're in, knowing the team you're working in, actually getting things done, proving you can manage people. These are the skills that I think people see and the reason why you move up the corporate ladder, as opposed to the number of qualifications you have. However, I have seen that a lot of CEOs and people very high up do have things like an MBA, which is something that you'd have to study at university, which means you'd have to, if you're already in like a professional firm studying your ACA or ACCA, then you'd have to leave to actually study at university, which means you're taking a significant pay cut from not working in employment, and you're having to pay anywhere between, say, £60,000 to £200,000 to try and get your MBA at a reputable university. So that's an option that I guess would complement chartered accountancy. I know that people who worked at PwC who didn't really like audit and had a particular interest in tax actually transferred over and then got the CTA, which was the chartered tax advisory qualification, and that involved doing an extra, I think, 3 exams on top of doing the ACA qualification. Now, I wouldn't say that necessarily complements the ACA. If anything, it's just adding another feather to your hat in terms of your knowledge base, and probably just lends itself to you then working specifically within the tax industry if that's something that interests you. So in terms of qualifications, it's not something that I overly focus on now that I've been working in finance for 10 years. So I'm more interested in sort of building up a knowledge of the industry that I'm working in. So that's the first question. Hopefully that helped. Just in case that question is talking about which qualifications within the chartered accountancy are the best. So is it better to do ACA, ACCA, CIMA, which I think other people have asked me in the past? The answer to that is, once you've passed your qualification and you're in an industry, people don't ever think about what qualification you got. I don't even know if many people would know that I did the ACA qualification within the company that I work for. I suggest that what's more important again is the reputation you have in that company to get work done efficiently, or working with different people, having the motivation to get different projects done, being a leader. That's the sort of qualities people look for. You don't really get a situation where someone performs badly and you go, what qualification did you get? And they say, I did the ACCA, and you go, thought so. You know, yeah, that situation doesn't really happen. Okay, there we go. Hopefully that answered that question. Next question. I share many aspects of your experience during the time at PwC. What was your reaction from management when you handed in your notice? Unfortunately, at PwC, you almost have many managers. So this is probably another slight issue with PwC versus working in an industry role. Like an industry role, you have one manager and then they have a manager. And as a result, there's a lot of oversight over the work you do, which means through the year, you know, if you're aiming to try and get a bonus, then at least the person you're working for knows exactly what work you did. An issue at PwC was, you know, if you're split between 6 different jobs, then you have 6 different managers and they have, you know, senior managers and directors. So actually it's quite difficult sometimes to make your name because it's, you know, you have lots of different people you're trying to impress and, you know, all the work follows over from other jobs. So the point I'm getting at here is that when it comes to handing in your notice, I handed in to my people manager. Now, my people manager didn't really have much oversight over what I was doing as opposed to just communicating with other managers I've worked with at other jobs. And I get the impression there wasn't much communication going on there. So when I handed in my notice, to be honest, I don't think it bothered him that much and I didn't get much of a reaction. But that's not to say that the jobs where I did work on, where I was like the senior associate and leading that job, you know, I did genuinely get some level of disappointment about the fact that I was leaving and you know, from their perspective, they didn't understand too much why I was leaving because from their perspective, they did give me, you know, a lot of time and resource and encouraged me and said, you know, you're doing a good job and all that kind of stuff that you'd want to hear. Just broadly across the business, though, you don't get it in every aspect. So, you know, you might get it on some jobs. And I think that's part of one of the comments I was making during that mistakes video was not really sealing myself in with a particular manager or a particular set of jobs. You know, I kind of was just a bit all over the place and didn't have a lot of focus, which meant I sort of was taken all over the place depending on which job needed me. So really, to answer that question, it mixed response, really. Okay, hopefully that answered that question. As a graduate incoming this September, do you have any tips audit at PwC? You know, from that mistakes video I made, I tried to summarize, you know, what I sort of learned from those experiences. So, you know, to answer what tips do I have, I would be prepared to work a lot of hours. I would try and communicate straight off the bat with what I'm interested in. So people, you know, managers knew that I wanted to work in this particular industry. Say if you're interested in banking or whatever and you have clients within that office that do that sort of thing, then you might actually be able to direct yourself onto that job. You know, try and do some research about what you're actually doing in audit. I think I remember I went into audit and the first job I had, I distinctly remember going onto that job with very little knowledge of what audit even was. And what did we have to do? We had to audit grants. We had to audit grants for a council. And I was there with 3 other graduates. And the only other person there directing us was someone who'd only been there a year longer than us. So I think she was trying to work it out herself, as well as not being that prepared to then have to, you know, be a senior associate to 3 complete novices on that role. It was an away job, so it was quite exciting from that aspect because, you know, at that time you think you got like a food allowance and, you know, you're away with 3 other people that you're actually on the graduate scheme with. So from that point, it was quite exciting. But actually I keep waffling on and not sticking to the question, but the question is, do I have any tips? You know, understand what you're actually going to be doing in the audit industry. I've made videos on this channel actually talking about what auditors do, so give those a watch. What other stuff? Just be prepared to work, try and take everything in, ask lots of questions. Unfortunately, I can't say make mistakes because they don't really want you to make mistakes, but if you think you're making a mistake, ask a question related to that mistake, accept the fact you probably aren't going to know everything. So be prepared to try and ask questions and actually just, you know, and just generally get stuck into the work that you're doing and try and learn as much as you can, really, and try and build a, you know, your problem is you're going into the audit at a time where there's probably still a lockdown going on, although be it September, it should be ending by that point. So, you know, there should still be a sociable aspect there. But if you're still working relatively remotely or virtually, then still try and ring people. And, you know, another thing I actually had with the graduate scheme, which is probably a good bit of advice, is to set up like a WhatsApp group with the people that you're actually in that graduate scheme with. That was quite a good thing to do, because then straight off the bat, even before that you were going into the scheme, you could communicate with the people that you're working with within that graduate scheme. So that was quite good. So I sort of knew already some people, although I couldn't put a face to a name. So when we were on that scheme and doing the first couple of weeks training, there was already some relationship there. So, okay, that's some tips there. Okay, next one. Would love to know your opinion on the best way to progress from newly ACA to CFO and partner. So obviously this is just my opinion. I'm not a CFO or partner, unfortunately, so I can't say conclusively if these are the things that will get you to that position. But I have experienced people moving up the ladder and spoken to CFOs and partners about their experience of getting to the position they're at. So I would say, firstly, to move up to the next level, and I think everyone's sort of aware of this, you have to sort of either have the capability of doing that role or have very much evidenced that you're already doing that role. Because an employer is going to be a lot more enthusiastic about promoting you if you're already doing that role and they don't have to make any judgment about whether they're making a bad decision. So the ability to evidence that you're doing a higher role, a management, senior management director's role, for instance, is going to be the best way. So instead of relying on someone spotting you to have had those skills and having to justify it, just go out and do it and be productive in doing the things that you think are relevant for the person higher up than you. Now, bear in mind, the person higher up than you, every time that happens, what is effectively happening is you're taking on a higher level of responsibility, and so to speak, the buck stops with you. Now, in that regard, imagine you're going into work and the buck stops with you. There's no one else to pick up the slack of the work you're doing. And from that regard as well, you need to know everything about what you're doing because you're the one people are coming to for that point. Now, that only gets more and more evident as you move up the ladder. And in some regards, that's probably why as you work for longer and longer within the finance industry, you start to become more despondent about becoming the person at the top of the ladder, because that doesn't become appealing, and you realize the higher up you get up the finance ladder, that attitude of, I have to work every so often on a weekend becomes, I'm always working and I'm always on call because I'm the one responsible for doing that job. So the point I'm making here, I sort of, every time I answer the question, I go around this roundabout route to get back to the answer. But basically, you have to take on that level of responsibility in order to move up. What do you need to do to move up the ladder quickly? You need to show the initiative that you care an awful lot about what you're doing, even if the work that you're doing isn't that relevant. Because if you care more about it and you put lots of effort into it, all of a sudden the work you're doing becomes a bigger piece of work, and you can start, let's take an example of like something that I've worked on in the past. Say you have a job of automating a process. So you have an Excel document, you want to automate it, and as you start working on it, you start realizing that there's other pieces of work that could feed in. If I automate this, then that could come from it. Or maybe I could get all this Excel processing online. Maybe I could drive reports from that. Maybe, that could help with someone else's piece of work. I remember, start thinking like, I remember when, that person from that other department said that this is the work that they needed. Maybe I'll contact them and bring them in on it. And all of a sudden you start building up this skill base of bringing other people in, communicating information, feeling more confident about communicating that information, and building up you start to, even the smaller work that you're doing starts to become larger projects that you can really start to evidence that you care and you know what you're doing. And from that, you start asking questions, you start building up networks, and I think that's probably the best way. That's the best answer I can give for that. What other things to answer? So, can you pick and choose the clients you want to work with? Can you pick and choose the industries you want to work in within audit? So I would say the answer is yes. I didn't take that opportunity to do that. I think it was even asked me, what sort of industries are you interested in? And I was like, oh, happy to do whatever sort of thing, and then landed on a load of odd jobs. But there's always a certain range of clients within the office that you're working in that, if you really show an interest and you know a lot about that industry, I'm sure people within the office will want you on that job, because that's the first step, is actually knowing the industry and actually having an interest, because then you're going to put more effort into that work. There is a caveat to that, and that is, if you choose a regional office, they're only going to have the clients that they have. So you're not going to be able to say, well, I want to work on this client, because they might not have that client, or they might not work at that industry. If you pick something like the London office, they might have a larger range of clients, but then with the London office, for instance, they work on a lot larger clients, and then you might just be stuck on one from the start, and you might just know that a lot. You might be stuck on an insurance company, but then you're just working up understanding the entire FTSE 100 insurance business. So I would say it is, but that's why I'd sort of go into the role with a knowledge of what you're interested in, because the best place to start asking those questions is at the start, as opposed to 3 years in and you go, oh, actually, I don't like the thing I'm working on, because now you've just haven't developed it, and you're now a senior associate trying to switch onto a role without as much experience, so it's just harder to do at a later stage. So next question, hopefully you guys are still with me. Probably taking again longer than I thought answering these questions. I just get into it and then it's difficult for me to shorten my answers. I'm finding it difficult to choose between audit and tax. Do you have any advice? Okay, so let's just break down some things about audit and tax that might help you decide. So at the core of this, in both those instances, if you're at a professional firm, you'll be studying the ACCA. With the tax, you can then, I think, have a choice, or it might just be mandatory to then go on and do the following qualification, which is the CTA. So straight off the bat, you're online to get an additional qualification that you probably wouldn't have had you been in audit. Now, what does that mean? Well, you going down the route of becoming a tax specialist. Now, that could be very interesting to some people. I would say that, leaving and knowing a lot about tax is a very valuable trait. People always want to know how they can reduce their tax bill. In terms of the actual workload, within audit, you go on several different jobs and different clients, and you travel around, and you get a lot of exposure to how businesses are run, and you start networking more with people who work in those industries, and then it lends itself more to, say, working in, say, like a controllership role, or working within an accountancy department within industry. So from that perspective, it gives you more doors into a potentially a larger range of roles, because you have, say, finance business partnering, you have, preparing sets of accounts, like controllership roles, you have operational finance roles, finance analysts. So, so audit does have its advantages. In terms of the actual work you do in audit, it's very much like checking a lot of detail. It can feel at times very much like you're grinding through the work, and it can be quite long hours. But there's a lot of volume of work that you have to do, and I think from that perspective, audit gets quite a bad name. Now if we look at tax, for instance, you won't move around as much when you're working in tax and passing those qualifications. People who worked in tax were always in the office, or to my knowledge, they were always in the office. So you don't get that exposure to traveling around. I think the tax department within PwC was a lot smaller operation, because, audit is their, in professional firms, are their number one stream of revenue. And I think the thing that was following that was like consultancy, because of the higher profit margins. So tax is a smaller department. So even from that perspective, you might be working with less graduates. In terms of the actual tax work, quite difficult for me to say, because I didn't work in tax. However, people I knew who worked in tax were quite satisfied with the work that they're doing. And I think there was a lot of chat amongst people who worked in audit that they wanted to leave audit, whereas people who were in tax, I don't think they were talking that much about leaving tax. I think they were kind of quite satisfied with the work they were doing. So does that answer your question? Do I have any advice? Do you have an interest in audit or tax? Difficult one to answer. Would I have done tax or audit if I went back? That might be a better way of me answering that question. Probably would have stuck with audit, but then that's because in the regional office I was in, there was only one tax grad. So there was like 12 people in audit and, 1 person in tax. So from that experience, I probably had more to do with the graduates within the audit department, more to talk about, so to speak. Also from an auditing side, when you're doing the ACA, a lot of the things you study within the ACA are financial accounting based, which probably links itself more to audit than it does tax. Tax, you probably have a harder time passing some of the qualifications because what you're working with isn't financial statements a lot of the time. Anyway, that's that question. Next question. What are the chances being an FD CFO if you haven't got Big Four audit experience? Also, best roles to take if you don't have Big Four experience to becoming FD and CFO. Crikey, okay. Some of these questions are making me think a lot about these questions. Also, there's loads of questions. Been talking for ages here. So, chance to be an FD and CFO, very high. If you work hard enough and you're prepared to make work your life, I'd say. Like I said, people don't ask what your qualification is or where did you originally graduate or start studying from. Once you're in it, it's more to do with the work you're doing and showing that you're able to do it. On this point, I always thought that I would want to go to, say, Oxford and Cambridge, because then, it's like someone's telling you you're clever. But the point of going to Oxford and Cambridge is not people aren't telling you you're clever. It's that you are clever and you're able to go to Oxford and Cambridge. It's a slightly different point. So having a certain qualification or having, going to a certain university or, these things sort of go out in the wash once you start working. It's not about that anymore. People aren't asking that. If you have the traits and the qualities that make you a CFO, it's not about being able to, at that point in time, being able to point to a CV and say, oh, look, that's where I studied, so I must be able to do that. No, it's just people who make it to that level just have the traits and the skills and the knowledge base available to do those kind of things. Best roles to take if you want to be FD, CFO. CFOs always have a very good understanding of financial statements. I worked for a company where the CFO didn't even have an accountancy qualification, but he worked at McKinsey and became a consultant and just knew a lot about finance and financial statements. It's all about your knowledge base and knowledge of the industry. But I would say CFO, they normally have a good understanding of finance and financial statements. So if you pick a role in, say, like a controllership or controllership department where you're working on preparing the sets of accounts for that company, it's probably going to be one of your best places to go to become the CFO, I'd say. Given all that, how are PwC considered the best or in the top 3 graduate employers in the UK in the Times Best Graduate Employer list? I just don't quite understand what's missing. So I can see there's a lot of comments post that, but without me reading those and getting influenced, firstly, it's interesting that you point out the Times Best Graduate Employer because they were number 1 at the time. And when I got a job at PwC, I was like, whoa, number 1 employer. Felt like I was a big deal. And it's interesting that they're still there. Now, the reason they're there, and I have criticisms and I talk about the mistakes. Now, bear in mind, I tried to lead that video into saying, those were my mistakes. There were ways that I could have controlled the situation better to not have myself in that position. Now, yes, audit has its flaws. All companies have their flaws. PwC has their flaws. All the companies I've worked for afterwards have flaws. You're never going to work for a perfect company unless maybe you start your own. But the reason they're there is because they offer such a great opportunity. Yes, they don't pay a significant amount of money compared to some other industries. And when you graduate, they don't pay as much money as when you're working in industry. But what do they offer? They offer you the opportunity to learn straight off the bat as a client-facing role. You're getting probably one of the best trainings to actually study the ACA and accountancy qualification. They're paying for that qualification. They're giving you enough time to study that qualification, that you're meeting a load of other very committed, intelligent people that you can network with, that you can bounce off and try and encourage you to work harder. You work in an intense industry where, you're running before you can walk. And as a result of that, you do sort of accelerate. And, I've been in industry roles post PwC, and there's potentially some difference with the sort of attitude of people who have worked in professional firms versus people who have just gone straight into industry. Maybe that's a questionable one. But I do think, they're offering you, the opportunity to work with some of the largest companies in the world and a range of them. You can work with FTSE 100, FTSE 250 companies, understanding their balance sheet, their financial statements, working having communication with some of the higher up people in those companies. You know, if you start off in industry, you're not going to be meeting the CFO of those companies, or, you know, you might do, but it's not going to be asking them questions relevant and putting them on the spot in terms of being able to justify the decisions in that financial statement. So there's a lot of good that comes out for working for these companies. And it, you know, it promises you, if you work hard enough and you stay there long enough, progression and career progression. You go from associate to senior associate to manager to senior manager to director to partner to senior partner to working on the board, you know. That's what's offered to you, and there's a clear guide. You know, you do these steps, you work hard enough, you know, you give 12 hours a day, or, you know, you just rub shoulders with the right people and you can get there. And that's what it promises you. And partners at the end of it get £1 million a year as being a partner. You know, that's what's offered to you, which isn't offered in a lot of other jobs. And that kind of structure's not there. And a graduate scheme is kind of off the cuff. Oh, we might employ some graduates this year to tick that box that we're doing now, or have an apprenticeship scheme going on, but we're only hiring 2 people in this company, even though it's a FTSE 100 company, you know. As a result, that's why they're the top 3 graduates. That's my opinion anyway. Lots of comments here. What's the better company to work at, EY or PwC? Difficult to answer that. I'm going to say PwC because I worked at PwC. I also think at PwC, if you're basing it on audit, I think they did have a better record of less mistakes on audits. So potentially from a statistical point of view, that's why they're better. But really, very much the same, I imagine. Similar kind of clients that you'll work on. Bad hair day. You know what's funny about that comment? Is I showed my wife that video after I filmed it and said, look how terrible my hair looks. And I said, shall I record it again? And I just thought, no, I said what I needed to say. And it's just funny that someone first comment. It really was a bad hair day. I looked at myself in the mirror before doing the filming, and then when I looked at it afterwards, I was like, what the hell is going on with my hair? That's it. Those are all the questions. Long video, but hopefully it's helpful. If you have any other questions, put it in the comment section below. Like this video if you did. Subscribe to my channel. Try and be as helpful as possible. You know, I'm not a CFO, unfortunately. Would I have enough time to make a YouTube video, though? If I was a CFO, that's the question. Probably not. Wouldn't need to, though. Bye-bye.